Welcome back to NGO Monitor's podcast. NGO Monitor, the research organization based in Israel with the sole mandate to defend Israel's right to exist as a Jewish homeland within the human rights space. Today, a very special and dear guest, a very dear friend of mine, the Deputy Foreign Minister of the State of Israel, Sharren Haskel. But I cannot just talk to you in that formal tone. We go so way back.
Yeah.
And I think I cannot but start and share one of the anecdotes from many, many years of our acquaintance when you were a member of the Knesset and you agreed to travel to Germany and speak at one of the events that we organized in the Bundestag. And I was very pregnant. And on our way back, boarding the flight to Israel, you saw me with a huge package of Playmobil for my older son. And with the big belly, I was barely making it to the gate. And
you were walking like this with the belly out. I remember this.
Walking it was not. And you just walked up to me and you said, "Give me that box. You cannot be carrying that." And I was at Ave that there she is, a member of the Knesset, dealing with the most strategic issues, and she's carrying my son's Playmobil all the way to Israel.
But I think this is women, and I think this is just a natural thing for me, obviously, to do. We're first of all, we're people, and for me, I admire women who are hardworking women in top positions, managing and excelling, and are living this dual life in a top career and at home trying to figure out everything with the kids and everything. And it's very difficult. And back then, it was many years ago, so I didn't have my 3 little girls yet. But it's just the admiration of women who are capable. This is one of the most difficult things to do. And today, I know even more how difficult it is to actually, do it.
And you literally described yourself, right? Years later, as you have your own kids and you brought them to the Knesset, and it is no easy task grappling with the duality of this.
It's no easy task, and I told myself, Sharren, you have kids, you're in a different field. The man can continue and play in their field, you're playing in a different field. You know your job, you know how to do it right, and I'm not going to hide my children. I'm not. I know I'm capable of doing it. I know I can do it in the best way possible, in ways that other people are incapable of doing it. I can do all my tasks, and I can be a mother, and I don't need to hide my children. They are part of who I am. They are part of why I work so hard for their future, for the future of the children here in Israel. And you know what? I don't need to hide them. If you have a problem with it, then it is your problem, and it's not my problem. And so, I was breastfeeding twins until the age of 11 months old. And they were with me in the Knesset, out, they were sick, everything. And, it was sort of a mood of just trying to survive it, to be honest. Because you have the votings until 4 a.m., 6 a.m., and, trying just to do everything. And not to feel like I need to compromise my work, and not feel like I need to compromise
as a
me
mother.
Being a mother. And it is difficult. It is so difficult. And I don't want to set a role model for women, because I know how difficult and tough it is. And I know what a huge sense of maybe disappointment some women would feel if they feel like, oh, how do they do it? And
I have to live up to it.
Yeah. And no, you don't need to live up to it, and it is okay. And one of the most wonderful things in the world is to be a mother, to be able to raise your children at home, to look after them, to educate them, to turn them into the human beings you want. And it is absolutely okay also if you want to follow up a career and your mission in life and your ambition. Everything you choose to do is absolutely okay, and don't feel guilty about it, because in a sense, women who do that pay a huge price, and it is absolutely okay not to do it. And if we choose to do it, we do it our way. And if people want more women to be involved in decision making and in advancing humanity, then they need to accept that it comes with a package. It comes with our identity also as mother. And sometimes our children will come along, and sometimes to meeting, and sometimes to event, and and they grow into it. And it's okay.
Well, I'm listening to you, and I'm inspired by your words, and they resonate so profoundly with me. But I cannot but draw a parallel, actually, to the pro-Israel advocacy. Now, many will say, what does one have to do with another? But I think we need a little bit more of that duality, right? Also in how we advocate for our very right to be here, the state of Israel. We need the toughness and the determination. We know what we are fighting for. We have the right to be here. We're not even in the conversation of should we or could we or do we have a right to be? But at the same time, we need that sophisticated, versatile approach that maybe a mother or a woman has to customize, what we do and what type of advocacy as the attacks come to us. And I cannot but draw a parallel.
Absolutely.
And say that we need more women. Absolutely,
because the whole idea is to try and demonize Israel, to try and picture us as these monsters, and this, and especially in university as this male, white, colonialist monster who's, and the truth can't be more opposite than what they're trying to do. It is our story, the story of mothers, the story of creation, the story of God, the story of life, the story of humanity. Israel is one of the only most remarkable story, and the only case in history where the indigenous people of the land, after persecution, after expulsion, are back in their homeland, reviving it, and the story of the Jews is a story of life, of light. And in many cases, and I hear these chants in the streets to globalize the Intifada and to call for death calls and death chants and destruction. And we know what destruction is. It's been pointed towards us generation after generation after generation. And try and think about it. If my grandparents have survived Auschwitz in Germany and their property were confiscated and everything that they've been through, does that gives me a legitimacy to go and murder today German people, or to go and expel people who took their property or anything like that? Can murder be excused? No. Absolutely not. And that's why the story of my grandparents was a story of life, of resurrection, of building life, of building a family. This is our biggest revenge. Life, family, children. And that's why the children are part of our identity, of our roots, of everything that, that is us. And regardless of these things and this double standard and hypocrisy, Israel is not that story. This is a story of resurrection, of indigenous people who are capable to come back to the land that was stolen from them, that was taken in the most vicious way, where we were expelled everywhere around the world. If my grandparents from Morocco and everything that they've been through, and the expulsion there, and taking their property and confiscating everything that they own, this is a story of the Jewish people coming back, reviving the language and the culture and the religion. And it's an inspiration story for every other indigenous people who are fighting for their liberation. And this is the true bond and connection between us and Persian people, the Iranian people, and the Indian people, and the Kurdish people, and the every indigenous people and the story of their land. It's an inspiration, and people are trying to reverse it, demonize, and we'll fight it. The truth will prevail. I know it. And you know how I know it, Olga?
How?
Because this is our historical story, generations after generation. They come, they try to eliminate us, to genocide us, to persecute us, and we overcome it. Because the truth, the light, the love is on our side, and the light will always defeat the evil.
I mean, we need more of this. And basically what you're saying is there's nothing new under the sun, right? The anti-Semitism always comes in a slightly different package that is adapted, right, to the political discourse or the system, the value system of that era. It used to be religion, it used to be race. Now, today, it's human rights, okay? It is everything that is packaged in the language of international law and justice and international and transnational institutions. You know, they will have the world believe that the United Nations dictate the morality of the world. And this is exactly the battlefield where we perhaps are challenged the most, right? Because they always go after us where we are the weakest. In the past, maybe the fighting for ourselves physically was not our forte. But now we live in a different reality. We have a strong country, and I say this even after October the 7th, and a strong army and proud people. And we conduct this conversation still in the shadow of what might be with Iran, right? There might be another round of war. There might be another barrage of missiles at us and so on. And yet, I have to say that worries me less than the political assault, a full-blown political attack, a systematic campaign that has many faces against us. It ranges from the International Criminal and International Justice Court in The Hague, the manipulations of the United Nations.
But it starts first in the media, in the social media, and in universities.
For sure. And it goes to hunting down Israeli soldiers when they travel the world, labeling products, or getting Israeli companies banned from trade shows or cultural.
So these are already the actions of the propaganda war. And we need to realize and understand what we're facing, okay? This is not just an attempt to demonize Jews. It's part of a much bigger strategy of destabilizing Western democracies. Because if you look out throughout history, the Jews were always a symptom for a much deeper disease. Okay, and what we see today, the rise of hundreds of % in anti-Semitism, in attacking Jews, discriminating Jews, it's only a symptom of a much deeper disease. And
they always first come for the Jews, but never.
Yeah, but it never ends with the Jews. And you can already see in France how they're burning churches, and how in Germany they're attacking Christmas markets during Christmas times. But the deeper disease is the Third World War we're facing right now. This is radical Islamists against Western democracies, the values of freedom, of equality, of women's right, of freedom of religion. And what they're doing, they're not just setting up their military, and they are, okay, but they're also fronting a media war, social media, campuses. This is a whole propaganda like the Nazi did, you know, with Goebbels, which was fronting that propaganda war. And what they're doing now is trying, you know, and Israel is just a symptom, create a hatred towards Western values and Western democracies. So if you see in universities, you see, you know, an everyday average American have to apologize for his history, for his identity, for who he is, for his culture, for everything. Why? Because this is an attempt to rewrite history, to destabilize it, and to create a generation that hates their culture, that hates their history, that hates their
And
country.
can destroy it from within.
Exactly. And this is something that, the KGB were doing everywhere in order to destabilize countries and to infiltrate in. Okay, and they're using, and you can see the documents by the Muslim Brotherhood and their strategic plan to push Sharia in America. And they talk about civil organizations, they talk about university, they talk about Muslim communities. And the way they infiltrate there is by pushing their narratives and their side and how they view things, and they are rewriting history. And in many cases, when you see those demonstrations in New York, you hear them, those chants to globalize the Intifada. What does it mean? It means to bring the war into America, bring the war in the Middle East and the conflict into America, bring it to London, bring it to Paris.
So let me try to take you even more, precise in that spot that you are describing, and bring it closer to maybe NGO Monitor issues. Center stage, spearheading all these are so-called human rights NGOs, non-governmental organizations.
Yeah.
Now, they range from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International that, champion the genocide and apartheid libels, all the way to a bunch of terror-affiliated NGOs. We have seen many of them lead the campus riots, but even more dangerously in a way, the main groups behind attempts to impose arms embargo, to go after Israeli soldiers, or to manipulate the law, the courts in different countries, are terror-affiliated, terror-linked Palestinian so-called human rights NGOs, many of which are actually funded through European governments through their official development and humanitarian programs, aid. You and Minister Saar have, since you assumed office, you have taken even more hands-on approach, and you have been very outspoken on many of these issues, many of the European countries. And I want to ask you, in your encounters, particularly with European policymakers and decision makers, has anything changed since October the 7th? Have they come closer to understanding that our war is not just ours, but these are undermining the foundations of democracy?
First of all, NGO monitors have been extremely instrumental in revealing the true face of different programs, European programs, and organizations and their agenda as well. This is one of the main components in their strategy on how to infiltrate into Western democracies and how to push that narrative. And once you follow that money and you know what's the source and what's the agenda, you can reveal it to the public. And I think that the best disinfectant, is light. And NGO monitors have been doing incredible work throughout the last few years in revealing and exposing a lot of these ties and those relationships and the agenda behind the scene. We have been going through quite a few organizations, and we said enough is enough. Okay, we cannot have organizations who are linked to terrorists like Hamas, like UNRWA that was revealed, and others. We cannot have terrorist organizations mask themselves as humanitarian organizations, because it means that this money, these people are killing our people. And after the 7th of October, we've said enough is enough. And so we've been cracking down on quite a few of these organizations, and there's been many changes in policies in order to make sure that we clean up some of these organizations from terrorists and from people who associate themselves with terrorist organizations. The second thing is, when you look on these demonstrations and the people who are leading it, as you've said, you can see even in the signs, there's, I think in America, the Socialist Fronts for America, the communist parties and organizations, where the money comes from. Where does it come from? And you see a lot of the organizations on campuses, on the streets, all of it A lot of the funding comes from Qatar, comes from Iran, it comes from Hamas, it comes from Turkey, and they have infiltrated America and they've infiltrated campuses as well. And they are operating there. And it was such a hypocrisy that in times, where there's such a, social sensitivity, right? That no matter who will come, a gay person or a queer person or a Muslim person or an African American person, and will just say in a room, I feel uncomfortable with this. It actually offends me. Then everybody rises on, on 2 feet, and they shut down and fight and protect this person, and there's such a huge condemnation. And then when a Jewish person come and say, I am violently being attacked, I am being discriminated against, and everybody are shutting their mouth. This is such a hypocrisy. And it is part of that narrative that they are pushing through universities about hating Western democracy. It's a symptom of a bigger disease. When Bob Dylan, the rapper, went on stage and those useful idiots were chanting with him, death, death to the IDF, those genocidal slogans. 6 months before that, he was chanting in his performances, kill your local MP. 2 years before, he was chanting, kill your local policeman. And so you need to understand that his hatred, that movement hatred, is first of all towards America, towards American values, American culture, toward Britain and British values. It is a deep hatred to everything they represent. And let me try and explain to you why. And, we're saying big words. They're trying to crumble down and to destabilize those countries from within. And they can, because then it's a door that's open to push other radical ideas and different identity and different values that are contradicting your values of democracy, of freedom, of equality, of women's right, of freedom of religion. One of our biggest achievements in the last 2 years, from a military perspective, you cannot defend your country just with technology and with arms and with airplanes and ammunition. This is not how a war can be won. It's won with people who are operating these airplanes, who are sitting behind those screens, who are operating those high-tech or ammunition or whatever it is. And it is what's pushing them. Okay, when the war opened in Ukraine, okay, when Russia attacked Ukraine, there are today millions of refugees from Ukraine and from Russia who have fled for their lives. On Israel, on the 7th of October, one of the most murderous attempts of genocide of the Jewish people here in Israel. And on the 7th of October, on the 8th of October, there were thousands and tens of thousands of people from all around the world trying to book flights to come to Israel, not to flee, but to come, to fight for our country, to fight for our values, to fight for our culture. And it is because we are self-confident in our identity. We love our history. We cherish our culture. We value our religion. We are proud in our flag. We're proud of this beautiful flag. And when I was 18 years old, I joined the IDF as a combat soldier to defend my country and to defend my people. It was out of love and out of appreciation and the value of what it brought to me. And I was willing to lose my life in the defense of this country to defend my people and my family. And what they don't understand is that this generation that is being taught to hate the value, to hate the flag, to hate the tradition, if God forbid in 1 generation, 2 generations, if that continues, who's going to stand in the front line for Britain? Who's going to stand in the front line for France or for Canada or for America? would they risk their life and lose their life to defend their flag, to defend their tradition, to defend their country?
Probably not. But what do we do? You basically started talking about how there's been a steady normalization of radical speech, anti-Semitism being part of it, or the center from which it furthers to other areas. And there has been a systematic platforming of anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism that is cushioned in the language of anti-Zionism, right? That has especially, obviously, after October the 7th, peaked and brought to a series of physically violent attacks on the Jewish communities around the world. And this one is going to hit close to home. It culminated, sadly, with the Bondi Beach terror attack. But it didn't surprise anyone, I think, because of everything that we have witnessed. As the antithesis to the light, and I always try to explain to people, as someone living in Israel, there is a dichotomy. We've been going through the most difficult 2.5 years, and at the same time, there has been an awakening of light that all of us are feeling, and the pride and sort of a repurpose of why are we here and what are we fighting for. But the Jewish communities around the world are not necessarily part of that, because their daily reality is completely different. Their lives are threatened in a different way to how our lives are threatened here. Do you think that following the Bondi attack, anything has or will change with the Australian government that we know has done nothing to fight anti-Semitism? On the contrary. And do you think that this is an isolated case in 2026, or might we see more of this around the world?
Wow. So the Bondi attack hit me very personally as well. I lived in Sydney in this
Bondi
neighborhood
area, right?
For almost 6 years. I lived in Maroubra, I lived in Bondi, I worked in Bondi. I went to that Chabad house in order to do the Jewish celebration, to pick up my Chanukiah or the matzahs on Passover. And this is my community. And I was heartbroken. I was still shattered from this vile attack. And I was shocked, but it was no surprise. And I'm not just saying it was no surprise. I warned about it. I wrote articles about it. I yelled in interviews that this will end in bloodshed. And they didn't listen. They were sort of wavering it off, saying, Australia's not like that. This is impossible in Australia. Completely ignoring the signs. And, it was inflamed and legitimized, and I want to take you down to the resolution to understand why. Because after the 7th of October, on the 8th of October, you already saw those hate marches in support of Hamas everywhere, in Melbourne, in Sydney. They were going out the streets chanting, "Gas the Jews."
Very violently.
And I was yelling out there, how come no one was prosecuted? This is a call for murder, a call for violence, not against Israel, but against the Jews of Australia. How come no one's standing up to defend them? How come no one was arrested? This is a criminal offense in Australia. And they didn't not just, not said, we didn't found. They said, that's not what they said. They only said, where are the Jews? Or, excuse my language, fuck the Jews. So that's okay. But they were trying to give excuses for that. And the longer that continued, they did not deal with the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. And then it's like a ball of snow. Mm-hmm. If the government is not stating clear lines and saying anti-Semitism is unacceptable and actually take actions to fight it, it will grow. And that's how synagogues started to burn. They burned synagogues. Jewish daycare, attacking Jewish businesses, attacking people who are visibly Jews, okay? And yet they didn't do anything. I mean, even an anti-Semitic report, after we corner them with a lot of criticism, was being made by an envoy. So an envoy for anti-Semitism was appointed, and they made a report about it. Perfect. Not one conclusion out of this report was adopted by the government. Not one of them was actually put in place, in action. So there was a lot of talks and zero actions and zero backing of the government.
And even this week, as the President Herzog is completing his visit to Australia, I just saw the news this morning that the government is calling for the protesters, because there's protests, because he's going to commemorate the Bondi attack and to meet with the Jewish community. The government is going out to the protesters and saying, find a different way to express your frustration. They're not saying, why are you protesting?
Take the temperature down.
Exactly.
Okay, and not calling them out as they are, Jew haters, supporters of terrorist organizations. That's what it's really all about. But it is because of the government. Because the second thing that they did, first of all, the second thing that they did was the rhetoric against Israel and spreading a lot of the blood libels and the lies about Israel that gave legitimacy to the actions of anti-Semites in Australia. And by that, the government actually inflated the situation, gave legitimacy to those protesters. And you can't just wake up one day and tell them, oh, that's very bad, You've legitimized that for 2 years with your rhetoric, with the lies that you spread, with this misinformation about Israel, and you connected the dots as well. And so knowing both of these cases that have happened, the government rhetorics, the rise of anti-Semitism, plus the rise of extremists, the terrorist activities, Hezbollah, Iran, things like that, it was, written on the wall. This is only a matter of time until blood will be spilled. And I wrote about it, I had interviews about it, and they did not listen. And that's why we could say very, very confidently that, we've warned about it, and they've done nothing about it. So it wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a surprise to us, unfortunately. And in other cases as well, you were asking, will we see more cases like that? Yes, in countries who are continuing this rhetoric, who are not fighting anti-Semitism, the hatred towards Jews, who are not protecting the Jewish community, who are not setting a clear red line against violence, it is very, very likely that blood will be spilled. And I think the next countries are, you can mark them. You can see what's happening in Canada, you can see what's happening in France, and you can see what's happening in the UK.
And in Spain?
In Spain, absolutely. And, it's not, people might laugh about it, but the fact is that President Trump have said he will give refuge to refugees, Jews from the UK because of persecution. And we might really want to laugh about it, but it's real. It's serious.
So what is our demand, especially sitting here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? I cannot bring us at this point to, what was it, a couple of months ago, there was, Jerusalem hosted the half an annual meeting of the IHRA Assembly, right?
The
Exactly, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance Assembly, where representatives of all members of this big alliance, basically representatives of both ministries of foreign affairs, of the member states, as well as of the civil society, gathered in Jerusalem to discuss the most burning issues in fighting anti-Semitism, best practices, and so on. And the assembly was opened, but a few hours shy of the Bondi attack. And you addressed the assembly, and I sat in the room, and I remember thinking to myself, as the conference advanced, that yes, there was a minute of silence for the victims, and everyone addressed it, and then the program went on. And most of the focus, and this is not just what was going on in that room, this is in general what IRA is busying itself, talked about Holocaust museums and remembrance of Holocaust and how we should use the universality of the message of Holocaust to commemorate, the genocides against other people, which are all praiseworthy causes. But Jews are burning as we speak and are being attacked on the streets of these same capitals. And I wonder if you think that there is an inflation of the term anti-Semitism and sort of...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's better off we call it pure racism, because that's what it is, especially during this time, because the propaganda machine have actually turned that into a term of, that is not positive. And so we need to call it as it is. It's racism, and use this phrase more. And unfortunately, because Israel is fronting this Third World War of radical Islamists against Western civilization, Israel had become a political symbol as well. And it became, unfortunately, because I think also on the left, whoever is trying or attempting to put a front or a mask as if they care about humanity and human rights and issues like that should be the first supporter of Israel, and not countries like Iran, who have just butchered for 40,000 of its children, teenagers, demonstrators, peaceful demonstrators who had no arms, or that are raping and executing women just because they did not dress as they wished for, or countries like Afghanistan and what they're doing with women, or other countries that we can go on, who are completely contradicting the values that they attempt or want to represent. So in this political world, we understand that the more you'll see in countries left and right, it will be associated also with Israel. And so most of the left will stand beside the Islamists, okay, and the Islamization and the processes that are happening around the world. And more of the right-wing parties are going to stand beside Israel, because we are fronting right now the actual physical war and pushing out those radical Islamists. And, if we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood and the IRGC and everything that we've been doing in pushing them backwards. And unfortunately, Israel is becoming more of a political issue in the world that we are developing into.
We're like in the middle of the clash of civilizations.
Yeah, exactly. And whether we want it or not, we need to face that this is the reality. And that's why it is easier for Israel now to combat racism against Jews and to affiliate it more with right-leaning governments and parties and political right-wing affiliation than on the left. Not, completely, but the majority. And that's why you see in countries who have more right-wing government, they are really cracking down on anti-Semitism, and it is safer for Jews to actually live there. You see how Trump went in and started fighting against discrimination and the racism towards Jews on campuses very hardly. Okay, you see what they're doing in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Germany, and every opposition to left-wing governments in Europe. You see that affiliation as well. And we need to recognize it, and we need to work in this world that was created.
We're running out of time, so let me finish with the personal question. You assumed office as the deputy foreign minister in one of the craziest and most challenging periods in the history of the State of Israel in 2024. In the midst of the physical war and the collective trauma and historical high in anti-Semitism. Give me or give us the best experience you have had as a statesman or a statewoman, and the most challenging situation, experience you have had fulfilling this role.
Wow. So let's start with the good, because I truly enjoy it, and I feel a great pride in different delegation that I led, and personal meeting where whether prime ministers or presidents have committed to change their policy towards Israel, to open embassies in Jerusalem, to change their pattern of voting in the United Nations, and that have really, made me truly understand how important this role is and what a huge difference I can personally make in building these bridges. Building these bridges with different also community and Christian leaders around the world who are facing also persecution and similar problems that we've faced, and how we can collaborate together in order to defend people all around the world. It is amazing. And on the more tougher side, I would say, for me, it's just heartbreaking. To me, Jewish communities, and I think maybe I take it personally as well, because so many of my members of my close family are living abroad, and I feel on my own skin, I can say, the rise of that hatred and persecution and difficulties in their day-to-day life. But meeting and talking to people who, were violently attacked, family members of people who were murdered in violent attack all around the world, people who were really persecuted, and the frustration and the lack of understanding of the global situation and the pain. It's just the pain. It just hurts me personally. So I think this is one of the most difficult things, because if I meet, a foreign leader and we disagree, we fight. I know how to stand my ground, and I know how to bring Israel's case. But with the pain of death and discrimination of a child, that it's just the pain that is very, very difficult for me personally.
Well, I'll use the opportunity to thank you for everything that you do for the people of the State of Israel and for the Jewish communities around the world.
Thank you.
I have had a chance of being part of many delegations that you have welcomed in this office, and you always open your arms and take the time to make them feel seen and heard. So we wish you all the luck in all your future endeavors. There's so much to do and so much to fight against and fight for. Yeah. And we at NGO Monitor will be happy and proud to accompany you and assist you in anything that you might need moving forward.
Thank you so much. It's an opportunity for me to thank you for all the incredible work that the organization is doing. NGO Monitor really being at the forefront of exposing that propaganda, the lie, the under the surface ties and the connections. And it's been extremely, extremely important. This is work that no one else is doing, and that is very, very difficult. So thank you.
Thank you, including the Playmobil.
Yeah.